Now, first up this week, we are talking about The Monkey, which is the new film by Osgood Perkins. It's a comedy horror, but it's very splashy, and it is based on Stephen King's short story of the same name, although I think it's been fairly liberal in its adaptation. It stars Theo James as twins, and it also features a starry cast including Adam Scott and Tatiana Maslany, and watch out for Elijah Wood in there too. Now, it starts with two twins as young boys discovering their father's old toy monkey, which they wind up, they let it loose, and then bad things start to happen. And this is a film that kind of spans the ages. We see these characters kind of grow up into characters both played by Theo James. And it's a very kind of interesting rumination via the medium of gore on the kind of idea that everybody dies, death is inevitable, and isn't that kind of funny? Now, I sort of feel a bit conflicted about this film, so Jake, I'd love to know, what did you make of The Monkey?
I went to see it last week, I think, and I was in a situation where the crowd seemed very unaware of what film they were going to see. They were very much expecting this very dark Final Destination-esque film, which Final Destination has its funny bits, but is mostly about the deaths and the scares, and people would consider that a proper horror franchise. I wouldn't. It's terrible. Don't watch that. There's a new one coming out, which I think we'll have to watch. A proper slander there. But The Monkey is hilarious. If you get on with the type of comedy it is bleak, it is dark, and it is gory. It is very aggressively gory. This film was a riot for me. I absolutely adored it. It was my type of weird. Because I understood. I watched the trailer and I was like, this is going to be absolutely stupidly ridiculous. And I was already understood that when I went in. And so therefore, I sat and I really just let it wash over me. I loved it. I just thought every performance was chewing a different portion of the scenery, and I thought, wow, this is the kind of film I want to see, because it's fun. You can really engage in the actual humor of it, in the darkness. The horror movies have become so very severe, austere, and I like that too, because I think they are one of the most defining and innovative forms of cinema. Yet this was just an alright comedic masterpiece of madness. You can tell it's from a Stephen King short story because it's a very neat idea that then is built upon, and it has quite a ridiculous storyline, a ridiculous twists and turns, and all the characters. Theo James actually is very solid. He plays twins. I liked watching him, and I like watching the younger actor who played the twins as a boy. I truly would highly recommend this to any horror fans and sort of dark comedy fans. I really would. I thought it's just insane. And I was so happy, because this is made for me. It's my sort of cup of tea. I love this kind of thing. I love slightly wacky, really well made. I can't deny it. Really well made, score good, the way it's shot, wonderful. Alex, what did you think about this film?
The first thing that I loved was the comedy. Like I didn't see it coming. I had no idea what the film was about. I think I'd heard recently that it was a horror. That's all I knew. But I think the comedy was brilliant. I started to look forward to all the deaths because they were so creative. It's just everything else didn't do it for me. I feel like there were so many storylines. As simple as the story was, we at the same time had all these tiny little things that I couldn't really keep up with. And I think the main thing for me is that I didn't believe, or I wasn't interested or invested in the characters. I think that's what my thing was. I didn't really care about Theo James. I didn't believe his win. I didn't really know who the enemy was or what. The conflict is quite obvious. And I really liked the whole storyline around the monkey. I thought it was quite simple and funny, and I don't really need more of an explanation on why it happens, on why they're cursed. But I just feel like I didn't really care for them. And I think it's because it wasn't very believable, because his twin brother is made as this psychopath. We don't really know why he's that way. He just is. He simply hates him. I get that it's the tone of the film. I get that it's a comedy, but I just couldn't believe any of it. And then I felt very little for the characters. I wasn't really worried about them. I think the one thing I liked is just the whole comedy of it. I was laughing every time, there was a crazy death and things like that. I think that really got me, and I think it was brilliantly made. The thing with Theo James is I think he's spectacular as well. He's a wonderful actor. I didn't love him in this, and I think it was because of the writing. I think as an actor, it was the perfect case of, I don't think there's anything he could have done different, but you're only as good as your writing goes. And I think oftentimes he wasn't so supported by all the other elements, especially his, like, when he plays the evil twin and stuff like that. I didn't fully believe his motivations or why he hated his brother so much. And then that's kind of explained. Yeah, there's the whole thing with She-Hulk and, you know, the mom and all of that. What are you thinking?
It's interesting because I actually really agree with what you're saying, because the comedy of it is, I think, simultaneously its fatal flaw. Because I completely agree, like, the comedy deaths are fun. I actually think in some situations they could have been pushed more. There are a couple of really, really inventive kills, one involving a swimming pool, I think is a real highlight, and there's another very, very kind of extended one involving sort of multiple horrendous injuries. But I think that at a point the film starts to want you to simultaneously take it seriously and care about the characters and have a big emotional payoff, and still kind of keep running the same goofy humour that it's been having the whole film. And I found that it was a bit tonally unbalanced. I think in part that's because the Stephen King short story, that's completely serious. You know, that's not really a comedy, although Stephen King always has a kind of a dark streak of humour in his work. But then when you have something like this being adapted, I think first of all it was going to be Frank Darabont. It was going to be completely straight. It was going to be really, really deadly serious. And then eventually we had Oz Perkins coming along and adding his little special sauce. You know, I think he said in an interview with Empire that when he read the script and it was completely straight, he was like, well, I'm going to take some real liberties here and just do my own thing. And that is simultaneously what makes it good, what makes it unique. It has a really brilliant creative voice. But to a certain extent, I think it undermines itself at times through the tone of the comedy, especially because, as I say, there were moments where I thought, well, come on, like, I think that death could have been more horrible. There's one involving bees, which is in the trailer, so I'm not afraid to mention it. There's one involving bees, which I sort of thought was a bit disappointing, honestly. Like, it's a very promising murder, but I didn't really feel it. Overall, when we get to this kind of point of, okay, now we're going to have a big emotional kind of family-centric climax, where I think it really does want to talk about family and grief and loss and horrible and funny madness of the fact that everybody at some point has to die and we have no idea how. I just didn't necessarily feel like it was the same film I'd been watching. It didn't necessarily feel earned. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. It is also, like you, Jake, it's my sense of humour. I started there absolutely chuckling away from the off. But I just felt that if it wants to have a little bit more substance towards the end, it maybe needs to work slightly harder, because I didn't really feel, like you, Alex, I didn't really feel any emotional connection with these characters in the way that I think they're expecting. I do want to say, I do think it's a good film, and I crucially think that the central conceit is absolutely brilliant, and the design of the monkey is absolutely inspired. They've done an amazing job of making something that simultaneously genuinely looks like a toy that you could find in a charity shop and take home for £5, but also something that actually, with the right lighting, looks like a creature from hell.
It looks like an age-old iconography. It's always existed, and that's kind of the idea of this creature. It sort of feels like it's always been there, and it is based on classic wind-up dolls, the wind-up circus monkey. It's taking something that exists and then subverting it, because they did actually change the way. Originally it's that they smack the cymbals, but actually that is under copyright by Disney for some reason.
That's why I wondered why it wasn't cymbals, because I'm not going to lie, I think cymbals are scarier.
Cymbals are scary. I guess you can crush someone's head, but drumsticks, I mean, if you've met a mad drummer, you know, they're quite scary. I think the design of the film is great, and the world exists outside of a normal reality, and that's why I think you're both wrong. I must say some fighting words here, because you're saying that it's trying to earn an emotional moment, whereas I don't think it is at all. I think it understands that it's trying to parodize. It's a parody of these big emotional moments, because those emotional moments, and I won't spoil the film, are so snappy and so quick and then diffused. I won't spoil what you mean, but you two who've seen the film understand what I'm on about. It's diffused so quickly that I think, with a sort of wry smile from the director as well, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It feels to me personally. Just my I can understand your gripes, but I think that actually it's really not trying to, because the relationships are so bizarre. Even with the good relationships, the relationship between the mother and the boys is kind of off kilter. Well, these relationships don't seem very human at all. Elijah Wood characters beyond a parody of the great stepdad. But I'm just like, I don't think it was trying to be genuine at all. I could say that some of the kills should have been pushed further, because the ones that are really graphic are the best, are absolutely the best.
I have to say, I think it peaks, unfortunately, in its opening scene, which is a sort of a cameo by Adam Scott. There is a murder in that scene, which I was like, oh, okay, like, now I know what we're in for. But I did feel like it never quite lived up to the momentum that murder set off.
You know, with all those sort of things, you kind of need a bit more variation. And I like that it wasn't just trying to up itself, because it really couldn't. It had its set pieces, then it just had a sort of string of chaos. And I think a lot of the editing is quite hilarious as well. It's edited very like a comedy, and a very effective one at that. And I believe that, you know, it is a full-on parody of elevated horror, with this sort of very sinister, beautifully shot classic monkey, but then also with all the comedy, and even just the twins angle at all seems ridiculous, something out of The Parent Trap in the 90s, you know. Someone will really enjoy it if they can understand that they shouldn't take any of it seriously. If they can even see some of the emotional moments as tongue-in-cheek, which I did, I think you can go away loving this film. But I can understand your two's reservations, to be honest.
I think that's a bit exhausting, to be honest. If it's all as snarky and tongue-in-cheek as you're saying, I think that's a bit exhausting, you know. And I think that there was an element to it where I started thinking, gosh, you know, it's just like I sort of know exactly what's happening. It felt a little bit formulaic at times, where we're just sort of waiting for the next kill. I don't know. To be kind to the film, to credit the film, I think I have to interpret it as being slightly more sincere in those moments than you do. Because otherwise, I just think that's a bit of a tired joke, you know, because the whole film is satirical. The whole film is, as you say, definitely a parody. And it's completely a piece of pulp fiction, fundamentally, in a way that I do really enjoy. But I think that it does have, in my opinion, a kind of emotional root to it. And, I think those kind of closing scenes, which I'm obviously not going to spoil here, but I think that the closing scenes really dial into that. You know, it is funny, it is comedy, but it does want to say deep things. It wants to talk about what it means to be a person, what it means to deal with loss. You know, Osgood Perkins' parents both died in very tragic and sad ways. And he's talked about, you know, kind of finding the humour in the absolute nightmare of the reality of being a person, and knowing that at some point you're going to die, and it might be really, really nasty, you know. So I think that he is trying to have a serious conversation there, and I sort of wish it leaned into that tone a tiny bit more, really, in the climax. You know, I have no problem with the rest of it, but it didn't quite ring true for me, which was a shame, because I completely adored Longlegs, and there were sequences in this which I think are unbelievably great. I mean, I have to say, there is a recurring visual gag of just cutting to a photograph of a deceased family member.
The parts that got me the most were the deaths and all that. My issue is, if you take away those scenes and all you have is kind of the characters and their conflicts, then I feel like I'm not invested at all. So I feel like the one thing that's keeping me hooked is all these deaths and how creative they are. But then if that's what I'm in for, then I might as well watch, I don't know, a Jackass film. It almost felt like pranks. It felt really entertaining. But then I feel like they could have been more supported if I cared for the people. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think it should be like, you know, Sophie's Choice, like a, you know, high emotional. And I'm not saying I don't want to be that invested emotionally. I get it. It's a comedy. We're in for it. It's a treat. It's not something I'll, you know, grieve later as a viewer, but just something that says, oh, I want him to stay. I want them to make peace. I'm rooting for this character. I didn't care about them. I think that was the thing. And in comedy, you can still care, you know, even though it's silly. Like, you're not going to cry when your favorite character dies, but you're like, damn it. I just wish I'd felt more.
I do very much agree with you. I think it's good. I think it's definitely worth people going and watching it. I had a good time. I just felt a little bit frustrated because I felt like it really could have been a great time.
Yes, it's nowhere near on the same level as Longlegs in its sort of impact, or just sort of how effective its type of storytelling is, but it was a riot.